Before the rains came, there was another world so ancient, so strange, that even memory trembled in its shadow. This was a world not yet washed clean by the flood, a world of soaring cities carved into mountains, of stars that sang in secret, and of beings not wholly man nor wholly angel. It was a world ruled by the Nephilim giants of old, beings of radiant terror and terrible glory. Their stories, like the smoke of forgotten incense, linger faintly in sacred texts the world was not meant to keep, and yet they were kept. In 1945, near the Nile's Bend in Upper Egypt, a farmer digging for fertilizer unearthed something strange: sealed jars, brittle with age, filled with pages that had waited in silence for over 1,000 years. The Nag Hammadi Library, 52 texts buried after the church condemned them in 367 AD, whispered again, just 2 years later, in the Judean desert. Scrolls emerged from caves like buried stars returning to the sky. The Dead Sea Scrolls, including fragments of Enoch and the Book of Giants, spoke of a time when the Nephilim ruled the earth and the heavens remembered. If you're intrigued by what the church buried and history forgot, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment with your location and the current time. I'd love to know where and when you're listening from. And if this story stirs something within you, share it with someone else who's ready to rediscover what the flood could not erase. Now, close your eyes. Let the hush of ancient winds rise around you. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight of the centuries lift from your shoulders. There is nothing to do but listen. The veil is thinning. You are safe now, wrapped in the breath of eternity. The world is falling away, and the forgotten world is rising to meet you. We begin. In the beginning, there was silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of waiting. The sky hung low over the earth like a breath held too long. The rivers shimmered without laughter. The trees, though heavy with leaves, did not rustle. And even the beasts moved with caution, as if they sensed something sacred and sorrowful approaching. This was not Eden, nor was it yet the fallen world we know. This was the in-between, the age before the waters rose, and in this breathless hour before history cracked open. The world was not ruled by men. There were giants in the earth in those days. And also, after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. This passage, Genesis 6-4, survived the floodwaters of dogma, buried in plain sight. But its meaning, its weight, was hidden. What were these giants? Who were the sons of God? And why did the early fathers of the church fear the answers so deeply that they buried entire books to keep them silent? The world before the flood was not merely old, it was different. The air itself was thicker, charged with something unspoken. The people of that age lived not in scattered huts, but in cities that defied erosion and logic. Monoliths crowned ridgelines. Towers kissed the edges of the stars. Great steps led into mountain hollows lit from within. These places were not built by the hands of Adam's children alone. There were others taller, stronger, older in spirit. The Nephilim. They were born of a union not permitted. In the days before the deluge, 200 watchers descended from the heavens onto Mount Hermon, swearing a binding oath. These angels, once loyal servants of the Most High, burned with desire for the daughters of men. The Book of Enoch, a text preserved only in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and long rejected by Western canon, tells of this fall. The watchers named and listed took wives, taught forbidden arts, and from their mingling with mortal women were born the Nephilim, beings of great size, radiant in power, terrible in desire. The children of this unnatural union were unlike anything the earth had known. Their presence shifted the balance of creation. The Nephilim walked not as men, but as demigods. They were taller than trees, with voices like trumpets and eyes that shimmered like the stars they once fell beneath. They built palaces from obsidian and gold. They hollowed out mountains and bent rivers to their will. The people of the earth both feared and worshipped them. Some called them saviors, others curses in flesh, but the silence remained. Even in their songs and temples, a hush hung above the world, for heaven had turned its face. The harmony of creation was no longer whole. The Nephilim, though mighty, were not part of the divine plan. They were interference, a dissonant chord, and the earth began to groan. The Book of Giants, fragments of which were discovered in the Qumran caves with the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, tells us of their dreams. The giants dreamed of judgment. They saw visions of destruction, of trees being uprooted, of mountains crumbling, of fire descending from above. They cried out in fear and sent one among them, Mahweh, to seek answers. But the answers were not comforting. Their time was ending. They had grown too vast, too violent. They devoured the resources of the earth, and when that was not enough, they turned on men and on each other. Still, the silence grew. Beneath this stillness, something ancient stirred. It was not anger, it was sorrow. The Most High had watched the world twist beneath the weight of the Nephilim's pride. What had been good was becoming grotesque. The harmony of Eden, already distant, was now barely a whisper. But the Lord is long-suffering. And so, he waited. He watched, until the silence of earth matched the silence of heaven. Then, he spoke not in thunder, not in fire, but in a dream. A man named Enoch walked with God. He was not like others. Born in the 7th generation from Adam, he lived in the shadow of the giants, yet did not fear them. The Lord took him up not in death, but in vision. The heavens opened to him, and he was shown the truth of the watchers, the origin of the Nephilim, and the flood that would come. He wrote what he saw in books, scrolls inked with starlight and sealed with secrecy. For centuries, these scrolls were lost, hidden from the world. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, in his 367 ad festal letter, listed the books acceptable to the church, and Enoch was not among them. Too strange, too cosmic, too filled with angelic rebellion and divine mysteries. But in 1947, fragments of these ancient visions were found in the caves above the Dead Sea, preserved in jars, protected from time. And suddenly, the silence of the past began to speak again. In those days, before the first raindrop fell, men still remembered Eden. Its gates were shut, but its fragrance lingered in the hearts of the righteous. They built altars from uncut stone. They sang songs in the twilight, and they waited for something, perhaps for deliverance, perhaps for doom. They saw the Nephilim in their splendor and shuddered. They saw the stars shift and wondered what they had done to displease the heavens. They did not yet know that the balance had already tipped, but the earth knew. Beneath their feet, the ground trembled, not with quakes, but with grief. The soil had drunk too much blood. The forests echoed with unnatural cries. The animals no longer came when called. Nature itself was recoiling. The Nephilim, though divine in appearance, were tearing at the weave of creation. What they had built glittered, but it was hollow. Their cities were filled with the sound of gold. but no laughter. Their hearts knew hunger but not rest. The silence before the rain was the pause between heartbeats. It was the moment before the word is spoken, before the bell tolls, before the heavens rend. It was the ache of a world that remembers what it was meant to be and fears what it has become. And in that silence, the breath of God began to stir once more. Soon, the winds would rise. Soon, the clouds would gather. Soon, the rain would fall not as blessing, but as cleansing, but not yet. For in the hush before the storm, there was still one voice unbroken, one man still listening, one path still open between heaven and earth. And through that path, the truth would come not in thunder, but in dreams, not in conquest, but in a whisper. And so the silence held, and the world waited. It began not with thunder, but with desire, long before the flood, before the ark was even whispered into being. The watchers stood upon the threshold of heaven, looking down upon the earth. They were not devils then, nor demons. They were angels, holy and bright, stationed upon the borders between the firmament and the world below. Their task was simple: to watch, not to intervene, not to interfere, only to observe the doings of mankind and report what they saw. But even heaven has its temptations, and even angels can forget. The earth in those days was fertile and wild, unshaped by human hand, but blooming with potential. Rivers traced silver paths across the land. Trees bore fruit in abundance. The daughters of men moved like sunlight across the valleys, beautiful, curious, unaware of the eyes watching them from above. And in time, the watchers were no longer content to watch. They descended in secret. 200 of them, according to the Book of Enoch, gathered atop Mount Hermon, a place whose very stones would remember their oath. There, they bound themselves with a curse, each swearing that if one should turn back, the others would be cursed alongside him. Their leader, Semjaza, tall and solemn, led the descent. With him came Azazel, who would teach men to forge weapons and polish mirrors, and others each with names like bells echoing through forbidden history. The heavens shuddered. As they stepped upon the earth, the balance began to sway. The watchers took wives from among the daughters of men. These women bore them children, beings of immense stature, strength, and presence. The Nephilim, giants in the earth. The first of them stood like trees, their heads brushing the skies, their eyes aflame with inherited radiance. They were not merely tall, they were overwhelming, consuming, filled with appetites too great for the world to satisfy. But the watchers did not stop with their unions. They began to teach. This, too, was forbidden. Azazel taught men how to make swords and knives, how to work metal and wage war. He taught women how to adorn their faces, how to manipulate with beauty and deceive with charm. Others taught enchantments, root cutting, astrology, the movement of the stars, the signs of the earth. What had once been sacred knowledge kept hidden in the heavenly realms was now scattered like seeds upon the soil, and humanity, hungry for power and fearful of death, welcomed it. The world accelerated. Civilizations bloomed like wildfire, quick and bright. Stone towers rose, etched with symbols not found in later ages. The Nephilim helped mankind build. For a time, they were architects of immense vision, able to move stones larger than oxen and shape entire valleys. Cities sprang up along rivers and atop mountains. Lights flickered in places that should have remained dark. But knowledge given too soon is not a blessing. It is a burden. The Church Fathers. Many centuries later, he would whisper of these events only with caution. Irenaeus, in his Against Heresies around 180 AD, warned of teachings that came not from Christ, but from beings who claimed secret knowledge. Athanasius, in 362 AD, would formally ban the Book of Enoch from canon, condemning such stories as heresy. And yet, fragments of these truths persisted, buried in the Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden in codexes, remembered by the desert mystics who feared what had once been unleashed. What the Watchers began, they could not contain. Their children, the Nephilim, grew beyond them in strength and pride. No longer content to walk among men, they demanded worship. They erected temples to themselves, inscribed with celestial names, and required offerings of blood and bread. They made sport of men's fears, calling down lightning, opening hidden chambers beneath the earth. Some say they could manipulate the elements. Others, that they ruled over beasts with their voices alone. But heaven was not blind. The cries of the earth began to rise. The soil drank blood and grew sour. The rivers ran thick. The stars dimmed at night. And even the wind forgot its song. Animals fled to the edges of creation. Men who once walked upright bowed low in fear or madness. And the Watchers, those who once bore the light of heaven, now trembled in their guilt. For they saw what they had done. They had loved. And in that love, they had broken the world. It was then that they turned to Enoch. He was still a man, not yet taken, but he was righteous. He walked with God and had not been corrupted by the teachings of the fallen. The Watchers sent messengers to him begging that he would intercede, that he would write a petition to the Most High, asking for their forgiveness. Enoch, with sorrow, agreed. He climbed alone into the high places, into caverns where voices echoed and time grew thin. And he spoke the words of the Watchers before the throne. But the answer came in silence. Then, in thunder, no forgiveness shall be given. Their children would be destroyed. The Watchers themselves would be bound, forced to watch the destruction of their offspring and then sealed in darkness until the day of judgment. The sentence was final. Enoch returned with the message, and the Watchers wept. Some tore at the ground in despair. Others tried to flee to the ends of the earth. But it was too late. Their touch had already unspooled the thread of time. The giants they had sired now ruled the earth like storms walking on legs. They consumed without end. Crops failed. Men starved. Women wailed in mourning. The skies no longer smiled. And yet, the people remembered. In quiet places, scrolls were hidden. Stories were passed from elder to child. In the deep caves near Qumran, some scribes preserved fragments of Enoch's visions. The Watchers, the Nephilim, the judgment to come. And when these caves were uncovered in 1947, thousands of years later, the world shuddered again, for the names were the same, the visions unchanged, and the warning still echoing. They had fallen. The Watchers, once luminous, now languished in chains. Their mistake was not merely in love, it was in timing. The mysteries they shared, the knowledge they gave, was not meant for that age. It would be as if a child were handed fire. They thought they were enlightening the world. Instead, they ignited it. In the soft, dark, the heavens stirred once more. The plan of salvation was already forming. But first would come the rain. The Nephilim were not yet finished. Their towers still rose. Their voices still thundered. The flood was not yet upon them. But the edge had been crossed. The turning begun. What had fallen could not rise without pain. And somewhere, in a quiet place, Enoch looked up. He saw beyond the veil. He saw the end, and the hope beyond it. But for now, he was only a messenger, and his words, written in starlight and sorrow, would travel farther than he ever could. They had fallen, but not all was lost. They were called the sons of heaven, those who descended not in fire or judgment, but in longing, the watchers, once radiant among the stars, looked down and beheld the beauty of the daughters of men. It was not lust alone that moved them. It was wonder, the kind of aching awe that blurs the line between love and rebellion. These daughters, born of dust and breath, walked the fields of a world still new. Their laughter echoed across rivers. Their hair danced like smoke in the wind. They were not celestial, not mighty, but they were alive. And the angels, in their purity, had never known such aliveness. So the sons of heaven fell. Their descent, chronicled in the Book of Enoch, was not an accident. It was a choice. Led by Semjaza, they bound themselves in an oath atop Mount Hermon, swearing never to abandon one another, never to turn back once their feet touched the earth. There were 200 of them, not vague beings, but named ones, angels with distinct purposes and gifts. These were not demons in disguise. They were watchers appointed by the Most High to observe, to guide from afar, but they chose to intervene. And from that choice came something no world had ever known. When they took mortal wives, the world changed. The very soil seemed to notice. The union of heaven and earth was not harmonious, it was disruptive. The women bore children, but not ordinary children. The births were heavy with pain and prophecy. What emerged were giants, Nephilim, shining and monstrous, full of voices too loud for silence and limbs too large for peace. They were not wholly evil. At first, they were simply more beautiful, more intelligent, more powerful. But with that power came hunger, and hunger, left unchecked, becomes ruin. The Nephilim were worshipped from the moment they could walk. Tribes offered them songs and service. Kings bowed to them, called them gods. In return, the giants offered protection, wisdom, strength. They hunted beasts men could not touch. They moved stones no army could lift. They carved the faces of angels into cliffsides and etched star maps across deserts. They spoke in languages older than the sun. And yet, beneath their glory, there was a flaw. They were not meant to be. Their very existence trembled with imbalance. They were beings born of broken law, children of a union forbidden by the heavens, and that fracture ran through their spirits. As they grew, their appetites grew with them. They ate more than men could provide. They drank rivers dry. They began to take what was not freely given. Soon, they no longer asked for offerings, they demanded them. Blood became currency. Fear became worship. Temples built in their honor ran red. The daughters of earth, once loved, now wept. The early mystics, those who preserved the sacred stories, tell us that the Nephilim were not merely giants in size, but in presence. To look upon one was to feel your own insignificance pressed into your bones. They burned with a light not divine, but derivative, a stolen glow, borrowed from heaven and corrupted through flesh. Their skin shimmered faintly. Their eyes reflected storms. Some could manipulate wind. Others could speak to beasts. Some moved stones as if they weighed nothing. Their gifts came from their angelic lineage. But without divine order, those gifts turned to chaos. Among the watchers, there was conflict. Not all had imagined the consequences. Semjaza himself began to despair. Others, like Azazel, reveled in it. Azazel taught mankind how to make weapons, how to shape iron into blades and bronze into death. He showed women how to paint their faces, to seduce and deceive. His knowledge was seductive, dangerous. He gave humanity tools it was not ready to wield, and the Nephilim enforced these new powers with fists and flame. Yet even in these days of rising tyranny, the earth held pockets of hope. There were still men and women who remembered the old ways, who sang songs beneath stars, who taught their children to honor the Most High. They lived in valleys hidden from the eyes of giants. They whispered prayers in the shadows. Some claimed to hear angels lamenting in the wind. Others saw visions of water rising, endless. They dreamed of ships, of judgment, of a single righteous line spared from the flood to come. And above them all, Enoch walked. He did not flee from the Nephilim, nor did he bow to them. He walked among them with the serenity of one who knew the end of the story. The Book of Enoch says he was taken up into the heavens, not in death, but in revelation. He saw the places where the stars were stored. He saw the prison of the fallen angels. He saw the throne of judgment, shining like crystal, silent and still. And he wrote scrolls upon scrolls. He wrote of what was, what is, and what would be. These scrolls, suppressed for centuries, buried by decree, were preserved only in the Ethiopian church, and rediscovered only in part when the Dead Sea Scrolls came blinking back into the world's light in the mid-20,000th century. Among these scrolls were fragments of the Book of Giants, detailing the dreams of the Nephilim. They saw trees uprooted, mountains swallowed, stars falling. They were afraid. For all their strength, they sensed their doom. They sent messengers to Enoch, begging for guidance. But Enoch, solemn and sorrowful, could only relay what he had seen. They had been born of rebellion, and rebellion brings ruin. Still, they ruled. The sons of heaven had given the world their seed, and the daughters of earth had borne their sorrow. Now, the children of that mingling ruled like kings, and the world grew weary beneath them. Creation itself began to fray. The skies turned grey. The sun dimmed. Crops failed. Animals turned against their masters. Men turned against each other. And the Nephilim watched it all, puzzled and perturbed, unable to understand why the world they had conquered no longer sang. It was because they had broken the music. The harmony between heaven and earth had been shattered. What was once a song was now a scream. The divine rhythm, once pulsing through every leaf and river, was now drowned beneath the weight of unnatural rule. And the Most High, long, silent, turned his gaze back to the world he had shaped. In the end, the Nephilim were not judged merely for being giants. They were judged for forgetting they were not gods. They were sons of heaven. Yes, but heaven has boundaries. Heaven has order. And when those boundaries are broken, when order is abandoned, what follows is not peace, but the storm. The daughters of earth wept. The sons of heaven fell. And the world waited once more. The world before the flood did not sleep beneath tents and fig trees alone. It rose in towers and shone with mineral fire. The Nephilim were not only warriors, they were builders. They carved the bones of the earth and laid the foundations of cities whose ruins, if any remain, are now mistaken for the work of gods or forgotten empires. They moved with a speed unknown to mortal hands. Where men might shape a wall in seasons, the Nephilim raised citadels in days. Their cities were not modest. They were declarations, monuments to their presence, reflections of their might. They built with stone so heavy that no beast could pull it, shaped so finely that not even a blade could slide between the seams. Pillars taller than trees, arches wide enough to swallow mountains, roads paved with obsidian, fountains that glowed with inner light. There were ziggurats with stairways that climbed into cloud, platforms suspended between cliffs, and chambers filled with echoing songs. Their cities were not cities as we imagine them. They were symphonies in stone, but they were not peaceful. Each was a throne. The Nephilim ruled from these heights, gazing down upon the tribes below. They named their cities after stars and ancient fires. Some say the name Babel was not born in the age of Nimrod, but echoed far earlier from these forbidden heights. Others speak of cities hidden beneath the sands, swallowed whole before even the ark touched water. Their purpose was more than shelter. They were centers of worship for the Nephilim, born of angels, long not only for dominion but for reverence. Temples stood at the heart of every city, temples not to the Most High, but to the Watchers, their fallen fathers. Statues of winged beings stretched their hands toward the sky. Altars burned with strange incense. Rituals were performed that twisted the spirit and darkened the mind. The people, bound by awe and fear, bowed low. They offered gold, beasts, sometimes even their own blood. In return, the Nephilim offered protection, visions, and the forbidden arts. From these cities, the world was reshaped. The giants taught their followers the secrets given to them by their fathers: metallurgy, weaponry, enchantment, astrology. They created libraries of hidden knowledge. There were vaults beneath the stone floors where scrolls were kept, scrolls that glowed in darkness, etched with writing not seen again until fragments of it surfaced in the Nag Hammadi codices, buried since the 4th century. Even these discoveries, made in 1945 by a farmer near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, were hushed for a time too strange, too filled with apocalyptic voices, like echoes from the Nephilim's own age. The cities rose higher, and with height came pride. The Nephilim began to see themselves not as rulers, but as gods. They declared themselves sons of the sky, kings of flame, lords of all beneath the stars. They wrote their names upon mountaintops. They reshaped rivers and carved canals where none had flowed. Some built great machines, powered by light or vibration, now lost beyond time's grasp. Their cities hummed with an energy no longer understood. But beneath the grandeur, something rotted. The balance of the world was unraveling. The forests around these cities began to die. The animals grew wild and strange. The sky above turned pale, and the rain no longer sang when it fell. Men began to suffer strange sicknesses. Children were born weak. The old, who remembered Eden's scent in the wind, fell silent in grief. And the Nephilim, in their golden towers, did not listen. They held tournaments of violence, pitted beasts against each other, sacrificed captives by the hundreds. They drank wine made from corrupted fruits. They consumed flesh. Their laughter echoed through the stone halls like thunder, drowning out the prayers of the faithful. Some say they experimented with life itself, blending creatures, reshaping forms. The ancient myths of half-beasts, sirens, and monstrous hybrids may not be inventions, but memories of their dark arts. In the shadows of these cities, humanity suffered. Those who lived beyond the walls spoke of great lights moving in the sky, of storms without wind, of giants appearing in their fields without sound. Whispers traveled faster than the wind, whispers of resistance, of prophecies, of a coming flood. The righteous clung to these whispers like embers in the dark. They prayed in caves, in forests, in places where the Nephilim's eyes did not reach. And always they remembered. Enoch had seen these cities. He had walked among them. Unafraid, he had been summoned not by kings, but by those who still sought truth. He warned of what was coming. He told of the judgment written in the stars. He spoke of the great waters that would sweep the earth clean. His words were written on scrolls now lost or buried. Scrolls that spoke of giants too proud to kneel, cities too high to stand, and a heaven that had not forgotten. The Nephilim laughed. They mocked the old man and his visions. They pointed to their towers and said, "Who can reach us here?" But heaven does not forget. And when the flood came, it would not weep for stone. The cities of fire and stone were a mirror shining, magnificent and false. Their walls hid their decay. Their altars masked their cruelty. And though they reached high into the heavens, they could not escape the gaze of the Most High. For the divine eye does not blink. It watches in stillness, and when the time is right, it speaks not in whispers, but in water. There is a quiet tragedy in stone. It does not bend. It does not yield. But when it breaks, it shatters. So it would be for the Nephilim, and so it would be for the cities they built with stolen fire. They did not come empty-handed. The watchers, when they fell, brought with them more than longing. They carried light, stolen light, veiled wisdom, truths too vast for mortal minds, and in the silence of their descent, they began to share. At first, it seemed like a gift. The stars, once distant and mysterious, were named. The soil, once turned by hand and hope, was now tilled with tools shaped by fire and metal. The skies, once feared, became maps. The body, once sacred, became a canvas. These were the secrets they gave us. In the Book of Enoch, the names are recorded. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, tools of war. He revealed the art of working with metals, of crafting ornaments, and the use of precious stones. He showed women how to beautify their eyelids, how to paint their faces, how to enchant the hearts of kings. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting. Amaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakijal instructed the study of stars. Kokabel revealed the constellations. Others unveiled the cycles of the moon, the movements of the sun, the signs in the sky. It was knowledge not meant for us, or not meant for then. These were truths reserved for another time, another people, perhaps even another world. But now, in the hands of early mankind, they burned too bright, like a flame pressed into the palm of a child. They offered warmth, but also ruin. Humanity, still young, drank deeply from this cup, and it changed us. We became aware, no longer content to dwell in valleys and offer simple prayers. We reached for more. We carved the sky into calendars. We etched rituals into stone. We wore rings of iron and gems that caught the light like fire. Women learned to seduce. Men learned to kill. And in the great cities built by the Nephilim, this knowledge became law. From these teachings came the first sorcerers, those who spoke with spirits and summoned shadows. The first astrologers traced the paths of Venus and Mars and claimed they could read fate. The first craftsmen forged blades that could pierce bone like cloth. Medicine was mixed with magic. Healing was wrapped in hexes. The line between sacred and profane blurred. And still, we asked for more. Some of the teachings were beautiful. There were songs taught by the watchers that could calm storms and make trees blossom in drought. There were writings that spoke of hidden harmonies in the universe, of the music of the stars. These teachings, later echoed in the Zohar, the core of Jewish Kabbalistic mysticism, spoke of Or Haganuz, the hidden light stored since the dawn of creation, to be revealed only in the days of redemption. Perhaps the watchers, in their grief, tried to share some part of that light before the world drowned. The Book of Raziel, whispered about in medieval Jewish tradition, claimed to be a gift from the angel Raziel to Adam himself, knowledge of the cosmos, the heavens, the spirits, and the language of creation, whether myth or memory. These ideas echo the same origin, knowledge from above, passed to man, hidden again. But the Nephilim did not guard these secrets with care. They weaponized them, and the people, fearful and eager, submitted. In the dark chambers beneath the cities, the scrolls were stored, bound in gold, etched with iron, read by moonlight and fire. Some scrolls spoke of the heavens, others of death. Some could call down flame, others could bend the mind. The knowledge was not centralized. It was scattered, each Nephilim hoarding what he had received like a dragon curled upon its treasure. And with this came corruption. The people began to turn on one another. Villages that once traded goods now traded curses. Mothers sang lullabies with double meanings. Children were born with strange eyes, strange abilities. The bloodlines of the Nephilim mixed with those of men, and their traits passed down like shadows, gifts that could not be undone. The earth felt it. The air itself grew heavier. Trees stopped blooming where certain chants were spoken. Water turned bitter near certain cities. Birds refused to fly over temples where the scrolls were kept. The balance, once delicate and divine, had tilted, and in the midst of this, Enoch wrote, he did not teach the forbidden arts. He recorded them not to use, but to warn. He walked among the people, a silent witness. His scrolls held close. He spoke of the coming judgment, of the great waters that would cleanse. He spoke of a righteous man yet unborn, whose name would be Noah, but he also wept. For the people, despite the warnings, did not turn away. They clung to the gifts. The secrets had taken root. Centuries later, when the Nag Hammadi library was unearthed in the sands of Egypt, many of the texts found within echoed the same themes: hidden knowledge, divine light, and the danger of pride. These writings, condemned by Athanasius in 367 AD, had been buried, likely by monks who feared their destruction. Among them was the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Gospel of Judas, each filled with whispers of secrets too old for comfort, secrets that the watchers gave us. But knowledge is not evil. It is the heart that holds it that shapes its fruit. In the hands of the humble, a blade becomes a plough. In the hands of the proud, a plough becomes a spear. The Nephilim, though born of heaven's light, held pride in their marrow. And the knowledge they gave us, however brilliant, was laced with the echo of their fall. So the world groaned, the earth cried out, not in words, but in trembling. Mountains began to crack. Seas whispered of rising. The moon turned red, and stars fell from the sky. Animals fled. The wise ones wept. And still, the scrolls were read. Still, the fires were lit. Still, the altars smoked with blood. The secrets had become chains. And heaven, once patient, stirred. The watchers saw what had come of their gifts. They watched their sons destroy the balance. They watched mankind spiral into sorcery, into greed, into worship of things not meant to be worshipped. They wept, but their prayers were no longer heard. The Most High had rendered his verdict. The flood would come. The cities would fall. The scrolls would burn. And the secrets? Some would be lost. Others would be buried. A few, just a few, would survive. Hidden in jars, tucked into caves, guarded by time, by silence, by angels of forgetting. For not all light is meant to shine at once. Some truths must sleep, until the time of awakening. They did not rule like men. They ruled like gods. When the Nephilim came of age, their power was unchallenged. Born of the Watchers and the daughters of men, their very breath stirred the air, and their voices made walls tremble. No man could stand against them. No beast dared look them in the eye. And so, the first thrones were set in place, not by vote, not by bloodline, but by awe. Thrones carved from mountains, thrones of black basalt, of crystal, of gold veined with something older than ore. Thrones too wide for mortal limbs, thrones not built to sit but to be worshipped upon. In every great city, a throne stood at its center, high above the people, elevated, unreachable. The Nephilim kings ruled from on high, while their followers chanted, danced, and bled below. Each throne bore a name, a title etched in symbols lost to time. Perhaps angelic, perhaps older. Their names, once thundered across valleys, are now reduced to dust and half-remembered echoes in the myths of many nations. Their authority was absolute, but it was not earned, it was inherited. And because it was inherited, it was fragile. To hold their rule, they needed more than fear. They needed belief. They cloaked themselves in garments that shimmered, fabrics that shifted with the light, that whispered with every movement. Their crowns bore gemstones that glowed in darkness. They created myths about their origins, claiming descent not from the Watchers but from the stars themselves. They named constellations after their own eyes, declared comets to be their messengers, eclipses to be their moods, and the people believed. They had no reason not to. For the Nephilim were not merely tall, they were transcendent. Their gestures carried weight. Their steps made the earth stir. They wielded powers the people could not understand. Some spoke to the wind, others to flame. One raised a palace in a day, another split a stone with a whisper. These were no longer acts of angels. These were rituals of tyrants cloaked in divinity. So the worship deepened. Temples were built not to the Most High, but to the Nephilim. Choirs sang praises to their strength. Scribes recorded their dreams as prophecies. Sacrifices were made in their names. Every victory was declared a miracle. Every punishment, a divine judgment. It was no longer clear to the people whether these beings had come to save the world or to replace its creator. Their thrones became altars. Some cities bore living altars where the Nephilim would sit for days, unmoving, while the people came forth to weep and plead and offer offerings of grain, of silver, of children. Yes, even children lifted up in trembling hands, offered in desperation to stop the storms or bring rain or ease the drought. The giants watched. Some accepted. Some devoured. Their rule spread wide. From the heights of their cities, they sent forth emissaries, lesser giants, hybrid offspring, or men so enthralled that they forgot they were not divine. These messengers carried tokens, sacred weapons, scrolls of command. They enforced the will of the thrones, and where they went, Thrones were erected in miniature altars that echoed the great seat of power. A world of fragments, each reflecting a greater tyranny. But not all bowed. In the high valleys and deep forests, in caves where the stars could not peer, there were still those who remembered the true throne. They spoke not the names of the Nephilim, but the name that could not be spoken. They gathered by candlelight and silence. They read the words of Enoch, words now forbidden, words that called the thrones false, the rulers fallen. They remembered Eden. They remembered the balance, and they waited. The watchers, still bound in heaven's gaze, watched with sorrow. Their children had exceeded them in might and in madness. They had not merely ruled, they had declared themselves gods. They had not merely built, they had unmade the sacred order. And now, the judgment written in the stars moved closer with every breath. The Nephilim, seated on their thrones of fire and stone, did not see it. They saw only the adoration, the chants, the flicker of torches. The rivers dyed red, the scrolls praising their deeds, the towers that bore their names. They looked into polished metals, another forbidden gift of the watchers, and saw only glory reflected back. But glory without grace is always a mask. Their thrones were heavy, not with weight, but with consequence. Every soul they ruled unjustly. Every ritual they defiled. Every truth they twisted. These were added to the burden. And though the people did not see it, the thrones were cracking. Some Nephilim, troubled by dreams, began to doubt. The Book of Giants, found in fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, tells of Maweh, a giant who flew through the skies seeking answers. He dreamed of a tree uprooted, of a tablet consumed by flame. He saw judgment, not as myth, but as certainty. And when he returned, he was afraid. Others mocked him. What could challenge the thrones? What force could move giants? But the earth knew. The ground beneath the thrones began to tremble. Faint at first, then stronger. Animals fled the cities. Birds ceased their songs. The stars dimmed. The seasons shifted. Crops failed. And somewhere, deep in the hills, a man began to build a vessel not of stone, not of pride but of obedience. Noah, but we are not there yet. The thrones still stood, tall and terrible, and the Nephilim, in their blindness, ordered more feasts, more sacrifices, more songs. They believed the silence of heaven was approval. They mistook mercy for weakness. They did not know that the first drop of rain had already formed. In a cave forgotten by time, a scroll lay hidden, written by the hand of Enoch, sealed by dust and prayer. On that scroll was a single sentence, whispered by angels, preserved by faithful hands. The thrones of the mighty shall fall, and the humble shall inherit the reign. Beneath the mountains, where roots reached like fingers into the heart of the earth, there were whispers. The giants did not hear them. Their ears were attuned to thunder, to chanting, to the clash of iron and the roar of crowds. But the humble heard them. The shepherd dozing beneath cedar trees, the midwife watching the stars between births, the child whose dreams were too vivid to be his own. In the places where the light grew thin, the old truths had not died. They had gone to sleep, and now they stirred. The mountains, which once trembled in awe at the Nephilim's tread, had begun to murmur warnings through their stone. Caverns that had remained dry for centuries wept with cold moisture. The wind carried voices in tongues long buried. Animals would not enter certain glens. Fires flickered out without wind. And in the night, the elders began to remember. They remembered Eden not with their minds, but with something older, something in their bones. They remembered the stillness of balance, before fire became a weapon and stars became signs to control. They remembered when the earth had been a garden, not a kingdom, and they remembered that every age of pride is followed by a season of falling. It was in one such cave, hidden beneath a stone that no giant had touched, that an old man wrote by firelight. His name is lost to us now, but his words lived on, buried beside the Dead Sea, wrapped in linen, sealed in jars. Fragments of his prophecy were found in 1947, when a shepherd boy threw a stone and heard it shatter something older than empire. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls were writings that spoke of the Nephilim not as gods, but as warnings. The man in the cave called them the Tall Ones, the Devourers, the Shadows of Flame. He wrote that the mountain wept because it remembered who carved it, that the stars blinked not from distance, but from grief, that the earth itself would rise up against the builders who forgot the builder. In these caves, generations of faithful ones kept the fire. They preserved stories. They passed down the names of the watchers and the secrets they gave. But more than that, they passed down the silence, the holy hush between syllables, the reverent pause before speaking the name. They knew that the world had been broken, but they also believed it could be mended. They spoke of a man not yet born, a man who would listen, who would walk with God as Enoch did, who would build not cities, but an ark. But above them, the Nephilim laughed. They mocked the mutterings of the hills. They built new towers, new thrones. They ordered more sacrifices. The idea that the rocks themselves might rebel seemed absurd. They had forgotten what the stones knew, that everything created bears memory, that even dust remembers glory. And yet, not all Nephilim were blind. Some had dreams, strange dreams, of trees split down the middle, of stars falling like ash, of voices that called their names not in praise, but in sorrow. They sought interpreters, seers, anyone who might twist the dreams into flattery. But there were whispers even among their ranks, whispers that perhaps the judgment spoken of by Enoch was not a fable, that perhaps the Most High had not forgotten. One among them, a giant named Ohia, spoke openly of his fears. He had dreamed of a book that burned his hands, of a scroll whose words cut deeper than any blade. He went to the mountain caves, hoping to find a wise man. He did not find one, but he found silence, and in that silence, he wept. He wept not because he feared death, but because he had tasted the joy of creation and realized he had spoiled it. The Nephilim, for all their power, had been given a chance to guide, to teach, to bless, but they had chosen dominion, they had chosen worship, and the earth could no longer bear them. In the shadows of the mountains, small fires flickered, not the roaring pyres of sacrifice, but the quiet flames of remembrance. Families gathered, not in ground temples, but around cave walls etched with ancient symbols. They told their children the true stories of Adam, of the angels, of the promise that one day a flood would come, but so would peace. And somewhere far off, in a valley not yet swallowed by stone, a man named Lamech held a child. The child's eyes glowed too brightly. His skin was too pale. Lamech feared that his son was not his own, that perhaps the blood of the watchers had touched his wife. But he took the child to his father, Methuselah, and Methuselah prayed, and he took the matter to Enoch, who by then no longer walked among men but still listened. Enoch revealed the truth. The child was not of the watchers. He was of the line of Adam. but touched by heaven for a purpose. His name would be Noah, and through him, the world would be given one more breath, one more chance, one more ark. In the caves beneath the mountains, the whispers grew stronger. They were no longer warnings. They were preparations. Women began to dream of animals gathering in pairs. Men heard the sound of rain in their sleep. Children drew pictures of boats too large for rivers. The world was listening. Not all. Not many, but enough. The Nephilim did not see it. They sat on their thrones and sharpened their spears. They summoned storms for sport. They drank wine older than empires. They declared themselves eternal. But the mountains, the hills, the stones, they were speaking a different truth. For in every age of thunder, there is a whisper beneath the mountain, and it is always that whisper that endures. He was not like the others. In an age of noise, Enoch walked in silence, while the giants built their towers and the watchers gave men secrets wrapped in shadow. Enoch listened. He did not seek power. He did not crave thrones or praise. He wandered between villages, planting peace where war was sown. His eyes, though human, held the weight of something more. The people knew him by his gentleness, by his prayers whispered to the wind, by his gaze that seemed to see beyond the veil. It is written in the oldest lines of Genesis, so brief that most pass it by. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. But what did it mean? The Book of Enoch, preserved in full only by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and hidden from the Western canon for over 500 years, tells the rest. Enoch was not taken in death. He was taken in spirit, drawn through veils of light, shown the hidden places of creation. The skies opened above him, and he was led by angels into the chambers of heaven. Not once, but many times. Why him? Because the world was unraveling, and someone had to see. Someone had to carry the message of judgment. Someone had to remember the language of stars and hear the mourning of the earth. The watchers, now desperate in their exile, cried out. Their children, the Nephilim, had grown monstrous, their power stretching beyond control, and so they turned to Enoch, pleading with him to intercede. He agreed, not because he pitied them, but because he understood the weight of mercy. In a vision, Enoch stood before the throne of the Most High, a throne unlike the thrones of giants, forged not of stone but of flame and glory. The one who sat upon it spoke not in rage, but in sorrow. The decision had been made. The watchers were to be bound, their children, the Nephilim, destroyed, and the world washed clean. But first, a warning. Enoch was entrusted with the message, not only to the watchers, but to the generations to come. He returned to the earth, not in triumph, but in tears. He walked through the cities of the giants. He passed beneath arches carved with forbidden symbols. He stood before kings taller than trees. And he spoke. He told them their time was ending. The Nephilim laughed. Some threw stones. Some trembled, but none repented. Their hearts had grown too heavy with pride. The knowledge given to them had eaten away the root of wisdom. They saw Enoch not as a prophet, but as a relic. And so Enoch withdrew. He walked the borders of the world. He wrote scroll upon scroll. He recorded the names of the watchers. He traced the paths of stars. He described the hollow places beneath the mountains where the fallen would be bound. He described the chambers of heaven, the whirlwinds, the rivers of fire, the wheels of living flame. These visions, too strange for the later church, were preserved only in whispers until they rose again in the caves of Qumran. There, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragments of the Book of Enoch were found. pages that had not felt the sun since the days of Rome. The names matched, the visions aligned, and suddenly, the man called mad became a prophet again. He had been called for a purpose, but not only to condemn. Enoch also saw the promise. He saw the flood, yes, but also the ark. He saw Noah. He saw the rainbow. He saw a time when the Nephilim would be no more, when the earth would heal, when the breath of God would hover again over waters made new. His writings were not only warnings, they were maps of redemption. He gave them to his son, Methuselah, and to his great-grandson, Noah. He taught them the old names. He passed on the signs of heaven. And then, one day, he was gone, taken, not by death, but by God. The people mourned. The righteous wept. The Nephilim rejoiced. The voice is gone. They said, the thorn in our side has vanished. But the silence he left behind was not empty. It echoed with everything he had seen. Some say his scrolls were hidden in caves. Others say they were taken up with him. A few believe they were scattered across the earth. Fragments of warning and hope, waiting for the day they would be found. That day came. In 1947, a boy searching for a lost goat threw a stone into a cave. He heard pottery shatter. Inside were jars, sealed for centuries, holding the words of prophets. Among them, Enoch, the man who had been erased, now spoke again, and his voice was the same. He had walked among the watchers. He had stood before the Nephilim. He had seen the flood long before the clouds formed. And now, across thousands of years, he returned, not in flesh, but in word, in whispers carried by parchment, in ink that refused to fade. He had been called once, and his calling had never ended. Now his words were reaching us, not to frighten, but to awaken. The heavens opened, and Enoch entered, not through death, nor by chariot, but through vision, a door of light swinging wide in silence. It was not a dream. It was not a symbol. The Book of Enoch says he was taken, caught up in the wind of the Spirit, lifted beyond the clouds, beyond the stars, past the firmament that held back the waters above. What he saw was not meant for human eyes. And yet, he saw an angel was sent to guide him, Uriel, the flame of God, gentle but firm, with eyes that burned like dawn and wings wide enough to cover mountains. Enoch trembled at first, for the brilliance of heaven scorched the soul before it soothed. But Uriel touched his brow and whispered, "Do not fear. You have been found worthy to see." And so, Enoch began his journey through the realms above. The first heaven was vast and soft, filled with clouds that whispered names and songs. Beneath their folds, stars slumbered small at first, then infinite. He saw the storehouses of snow and wind. He saw angels guarding gates of light. They did not speak, but their presence was like music. He passed through and rose higher. In the second heaven, he saw the imprisoned angels bound in sorrow, fallen long before even the watchers, their eyes hollow, their voices pleading not for freedom, but for mercy. Chains of fire held them, not to destroy, but to contain. They whispered of rebellion, of pride, of the day they turned their backs on the one who made them. Enoch listened, but did not answer. The third heaven was a garden. Yes, a garden green beyond imagining, where rivers glowed with life, and the air itself sang with joy. Trees bore fruit that shimmered with light. Flowers bowed as he passed. This was paradise, not a future hope, but a present place, veiled from the broken world below. Here he saw souls resting, righteous ones waiting, their eyes calm, their hands folded in trust. He wept, for it was beautiful. Higher still, the fourth heaven roared with flame, not fire that burns, but fire that reveals. Here, the sun and moon were kept, wheels of light spinning in perfect rhythm. Time itself pulsed here, measured not in days, but in deeds. The stars danced in procession, each one guided by a guardian. Enoch saw the signs and seasons, the path of the sun, the appointed days. He understood the mystery of time not as a trap, but as a song. The fifth heaven held grief. Here, the watchers wept, once glorious. Now fallen, they were not yet bound, but suspended between heaven and earth, between hope and sentence. They mourned their choice. The daughters of men, the children who had become giants and monsters. They saw what they had caused and could not undo. They pleaded with Enoch, "Speak for us." Intercede. Surely the Most High is merciful. Enoch bowed his head. He did not promise comfort, only truth. In the sixth heaven, he saw the holy ones, the watchers who had not fallen, who guarded the cosmos and held the harmony. They moved like fireflies in the wind, clothed in robes of stars. They read books made of light. They sang hymns too vast for language. And they welcomed Enoch as a brother, not because he was equal, but because he had been chosen. Finally, the seventh, there, the throne. He could not look at it directly, for it blazed with holiness. Fire poured from its base. Rainbows arched over it like living wings. Voices circled it endlessly. Holy, hoi, holy is the Lord of spirits. It did not sit on clouds, it stood on justice. It did not need support, it was the axis of all being, and upon it sat the Ancient of Days. He was not old, he was not young, he simply was. His face was not shown, but his presence filled every breath, every thought. Enoch fell to his knees, not in fear, but in awe. Here was the center, the source, the fountain from which all light flowed, the one who spoke the first word. From the throne came not wrath, but sorrow. The voice of the Most High said, "The earth groans. My image has been marred. The balance has tipped." He spoke of the watchers, of the Nephilim, of men who had turned away. He showed Enoch the scroll of destiny, sealed with stars. He let him read the judgments to come. And then he gave him a task. You shall return. You shall speak. Not all will listen, but some will, and through one man, I will begin again. Enoch, boat. Uriel touched his shoulder. The vision began to fade. But before he descended, Enoch was shown the future. He saw the flood. He saw the ark. He saw Noah standing beneath a sky that cracked open. He saw fire fall from heaven upon cities that forgot mercy. He saw the rise of kings and the fall of temples. He saw one like a son of man coming with the clouds. He saw a new heaven and a new earth. And then, silence. He was returned to his body. He stood again upon the earth, but the air felt heavier, the colors dimmer. He had seen too much to go back. But he began to write. His hands moved like wind. Scrolls were born of judgment, of wisdom, of hope. He passed them to Methuselah. He gave some to angels. He buried others in caves, for he knew they would be needed again. And they were. In 1947, men found his voice again, hidden in jars, sleeping beneath the desert. The Dead Sea Scrolls spoke his name, and we remembered. Enoch's journey was not just a flight, it was a mirror. He saw what we had forgotten. He heard what we had silenced. And he brought back a whisper from the throne. Repent, for the days are numbered. But grace still flows. The sentence had already been spoken, long before the rains, before the cries of the last giant. Before the ark's first plank was cut, judgment had been sealed. It was not lightning from heaven, nor fire devouring altars. It came quietly, through vision, through ink, through the trembling lips of one man who had walked where angels feared to stand. Enoch had seen the court assembled, and the watchers, once stars in the firmament, had been condemned. It was not rage that passed the sentence. It was sorrow. The Most High, who had breathed light into the first dawn, now spoke with grief. The watchers had transgressed the boundary between heaven and earth. They had taken wives from the daughters of men. They had taught humanity the secrets of the cosmos before its time. They had brought forth children who ruled not in justice, but in terror. The Nephilim, their sons, had devoured the balance of the world. And for this, the watchers would fall. Enoch delivered the decree. He returned from the seventh heaven with words carved in flame. He stood before the watchers, gathered on the slopes of Mount Hermon, and read aloud what had been written. They listened in silence, these mighty ones who had once burned with celestial fire. Now they knelt, trembling, their wings, once wide with glory, folded in shame, their eyes, once filled with stars, dimmed beneath the weight of consequence. They begged him to intercede. Petition for us, they said. Perhaps the Most High will reconsider. Enoch, ever merciful, took their plea. He returned once more through veils of radiance. He stood before the throne and presented the petition, but heaven did not move. The answer came not with thunder, but with finality. You will have no peace. Their request was denied. No pardon would be granted. No time would be added. The cup of their rebellion had overflowed. The sentence was this: the watchers would be bound, their brightness extinguished. They would be sealed in the valleys of the earth, in dark caverns beneath the mountains they once ruled from above. There they would await the day of judgment, the true and final reckoning, at the end of all ages. Until then, they would see the destruction of their sons. They would hear the cries of the Nephilim. They would feel the sorrow of the world they helped to unmake. And they would remain in silence. Enoch wept when he spoke these words, for he had looked upon the watchers not as monsters, but as fallen ones. They had once sung at creation's birth. They had guarded the gates of stars, and now they were to become shadows. One by one, they were taken. The earth opened in secret places. Clefts split the stone. Winds howled through tunnels unseen. The watchers descended not of their own will, but by the hand of angels appointed for the task. These were not gentle beings. These were sentinels forged of thunder. They carried chains not made of iron, but of judgment itself. Chains of fire. Chains of remembrance. The watchers were led beneath the mountains, far from the eyes of men. There, they were sealed. Some traditions say it was the valley of Dudael, a place so remote, so scorched by judgment, that nothing grows there still. Others say they were bound beneath the roots of Mount Hermon, where their oath had first been sworn. Wherever it was, they remain, silent, waiting, watching, and above them, the world changed. With the watchers bound, the Nephilim began to unravel. Their power remained, but their clarity was lost, their guidance gone. They turned more savage. Their cities, once ruled with terrifying order, descended into chaos. Wars broke out between giants. Thrones were shattered. Fire consumed temples built in their fathers' names. The balance had broken, and no hand remained to steady it. The people suffered. Those who had once bowed now hid. Those who had once praised now prayed. In the corners of the world, the righteous began to gather. Not many, but enough. They told stories of Enoch, of the watchers, of the judgment now unfolding. They began to believe that deliverance was not only possible, it was promised. Enoch saw all of this. He was no longer bound to the earth. Yet he watched. His words stretched like rivers across generations. His scrolls, hidden in jars and caves, slept beneath dust and stone. But his message endured. Judgment was not the end. It was the beginning of restoration. The later church feared this story. They feared the implications that angels could fall, that giants had ruled, that knowledge had been given and lost. Athanasius, in his 367 AD festal letter, listed the books that were to be accepted, and Enoch was not among them. He called the apocryphal texts dangerous. And so the Book of Enoch, though quoted in the Epistle of Jude, was cast into silence. For centuries, it vanished. Or so they thought, but truth does not die. In 1773, James Bruce returned from Ethiopia with 3 copies of the full Book of Enoch. The West had never seen the complete text before. And in 1947, fragments of Enoch's writings were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, including pieces of the Book of Giants. The story of the dreams and destruction of the Nephilim. It was no longer myth, it was memory. And it spoke with the same voice. The watchers have fallen. The world must be cleansed. But mercy walks beside judgment. The watchers were not annihilated. They were preserved. Their punishment was not vengeance. It was waiting, a suspension of light, a reminder. For even in their fall, they bore the mark of what had been a brilliance now buried, but not forgotten. One day, they will rise again, not in rebellion, but for reckoning. Until then, their prisons remain closed, and the flood draws near. They were kings without crowns, lions without shepherds. When the watchers were bound beneath the mountains, the Nephilim stood alone. Their fathers, once their guides, their gods. Their anchors were sealed in darkness. And so, the giants turned their gaze inward. What they found there was not peace. It was hunger, without the watchers to steady them. The Nephilim began to unravel. Slowly at first, a frayed thread here, a whisper lost there. But the rot spread quickly. Their vision blurred. Their memory of the stars dimmed. The knowledge passed to them angelic. Luminous became distorted. What had been sacred turned selfish. What had been wonder became wrath. And so the world began to bleed. The Nephilim no longer built temples to honor their fathers. They built monuments to themselves. Where once they governed with a cruel but ordered hand, they now ruled through chaos. Each sought to dominate the others. They turned cities into fortresses. They turned rivers into moats. They turned people into weapons. Their strength had not diminished. If anything, it had grown. But it grew wild, like a vine untended, strangling all in its path. Their voices, once harmonious, now thundered in competition. They bellowed over mountaintops. They hurled stones the size of towers. They tore at the sky, demanding the heavens' answer. But the heavens were silent. Their wars were terrible, not with spears or fire alone, but with forces forgotten, Some could call beasts from the deep. Others commanded the winds. There were giants who spoke to the ground and made it quake, who clapped their hands and summoned storms. Their battles cracked the bones of the earth. Mountains split. Valleys swallowed villages whole. The sun dimmed under smoke, and through it all, the people suffered, the tribes of men, already broken beneath the weight of the Nephilim's rule. Scattered, some fled to caves, others hid in trees. Still, others gave themselves to the giants in exchange for protection, though what protection could be offered by monsters at war with each other? Sacrifices increased, blood ran in rivers. Altars were never cold, but not all had forgotten. There were still some fewer than before, but still enough who held to the truth. They whispered the name of Enoch in secret. They spoke of the judgment already past. They taught their children that these giants, though towering and terrible, were not immortal, that their end had already been written in the stars, that justice would come not with thunder but with water. Noah listened, still young, still hidden. Noah watched the world unravel. He had dreams, dreams of silence, dreams of rain, dreams of wood and light, and something rising from the deep. He saw the Nephilim in his visions, saw them clawing at the skies, saw them swallowed by waves. He heard his great-grandfather Enoch's voice in the wind, saying only this, "Prepare." But for now, the giants roamed, without masters. They sought pleasure. Their appetites grew monstrous. They devoured flocks in a single meal. They drank entire rivers. Some turned upon humanity not as rulers, but as predators. They hunted for sport. They herded men like cattle. They called it tribute. They called it justice. But it was gluttony. And yet, they feared, though they did not speak of it. They dreamed. The Book of Giants, preserved in fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, tells of these dreams. Giants like Oya and Mawe saw visions of trees felled with a single blow, of tablets consumed by flame, of a flood that rose without end. They saw the face of the Most High not in wrath, but in silence, and that silence terrified them. They sent messengers, not to heaven, for heaven would not answer, but to the remnants of the righteous, to those who still carried Enoch's words. "Tell us what is to come," they said. "Tell us how to survive." But the answer was always the same: "You will not." Their days were numbered. They tried to bargain. They tried to build higher. They tried to escape. Some dug into the earth, seeking shelter beneath stone. Others built towers so tall the stars wept. Still others vanished into the oceans, hoping the deep would spare them. But no height, no depth, no distance could change the sentence already spoken. And the people began to hope. Hope not for vengeance, but for stillness. For a world where the skies were no longer filled with smoke, where the ground no longer cracked beneath monstrous feet. A world where rivers flowed with water, not blood. Where songs could rise again. They hoped, even if they dared not speak it aloud, for an end. The Nephilim, once majestic, now moved like beasts. They grew restless, paranoid, desperate. Their thrones fell into ruin. Their temples collapsed. The scrolls of the Watchers, once treasured, were burned or buried. They no longer believed in destiny. They believed only in strength. And even that began to fail. For strength without wisdom is a candle in a storm. And the storm was coming. The sky changed first. Subtly, the light was softer, the clouds lower. Birds flew in strange patterns. Winds began to whisper again, not with madness, but with memory. The earth cooled. The trees stood still. Creation itself seemed to hold its breath. And the Nephilim knew. They did not speak of it, but they felt it. In their bones, in the silence, in the dreams they could no longer control. The master they had forgotten was returning, not in wrath, but in water. And they, the giants, would have no master to defend them. They were alone now. Giants without masters. Kings without thrones. Gods unmade. The ground remembers everything. It remembers the first steps of Adam in Eden's quiet light. It remembers the blood of Abel, soaking into its soil, marking the beginning of sorrow. It remembers laughter, prayers, footsteps, songs. But the blood cries loudest. The blood never forgets. And in the days of the Nephilim, there was so much blood. Too much. The Book of Enoch tells us that the earth itself became weary under the weight of violence. The Nephilim, now without their angelic fathers to restrain them, grew insatiable. They turned not only on men, but on each other. They waged wars that split valleys. They hunted creatures into extinction, and when the hunger grew too great, they fed on flesh. Any flesh. They devoured the land. They tore up trees by the root. They diverted rivers. They scarred mountains. Fields once rich with grain were left trampled and dry. What could grow under such feet? What could flourish in a world ruled by gluttony and fear? And the people cried out. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers built altars, not of worship, but of warning. Villages were burned for sport. The cries of the innocent echoed off stone walls. But no help came. The sky, once filled with the songs of birds, now watched in silence. And beneath it all, the earth groaned. The Book of Enoch says, the earth made accusation. It rose like a witness before the throne of God, not as a poot, but as a victim. See what they have done, it cried. See how they tear at me. See how the blood runs. This was not metaphor. The earth itself alive, listening, created, spoke. It spoke through tremors in the ground, through winds that did not obey, through animals that fled before storms, through rain that refused to fall, and the heavens heard. It was not just the blood of the slain. It was the tears of those left behind. It was the broken covenants, the forgotten songs, the altars left in ruin. It was the corruption of what had once been called very good. The Watchers had taught man to kill. The Nephilim had taught man to forget. And now, the earth could no longer hold the weight of what had been spilled. Scrolls buried among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Fragments of the Book of Giants. Describe visions, trees being uprooted. The ground splitting. Stars falling. The dreams of the Nephilim were haunted by a single truth. The land itself would rise against them. And so it began. Fissures opened where none had been. Springs dried overnight. Strange mists rose from the earth. The air turned heavy, dense. Crops failed. Plagues came not of sickness, but of silence. Silence in the forests. Silence in the rivers. The kind of silence that precedes a scream. Some giants went mad. They believed the earth itself was cursing them. They pounded the ground with their fists. They bellowed into canyons. They built walls taller, thicker, but none of it helped. The soil beneath their feet rejected them. And in the midst of this rising sorrow, Noah walked. Quietly. He was not a warrior. He did not roar like the Nephilim. He did not command the skies. But he listened, and what he heard was enough. He heard the earth's cry. He felt its mourning in his bones. He saw the signs, the unnatural storms, the birds vanishing from the sky, the water turning bitter, and one night, in a dream clearer than any voice, he saw the ark. He did not yet know how to build it, but he knew it must be built, because the earth was dying, not from age but from grief. Every footstep of the giants pressed a deeper wound. Every altar of blood drew another groan from the ground. Every child taken, every tree burned, every lie spoken in the name of power. These were offerings to despair, and the earth, once silent, could hold it no longer. It cried out. The cry was not heard by the Nephilim. Their ears were deafened by pride. They called the tremors coincidence. They mocked the changing skies. They laughed at the visions. Where is this flood? They asked. We are gods. We are unshaken. But the earth disagreed, and heaven answered. In the throne room beyond the seventh heaven, judgment had already been declared. But now the seals were beginning to break. The angels stirred. The winds shifted. The waters gathered. Slowly, deliberately, with sorrow. Because judgment is not wrath alone. It is a cleansing. The blood of the innocent must not cry forever. The ground must be allowed to heal. Enoch had seen it. He had walked in the chambers where the earth's cries were recorded, each injustice like smoke rising. He had seen the bowls of wrath, filling drop by drop, and he had wept. Not because he loved destruction, but because he loved what would come after. A world where children played without fear, where animals walked beside men again, where the name of the Most High was spoken in reverence. Not in mockery, but first the blood must be answered. The earth, as a witness, could not lie. It had spoken, and the sky was listening. Noah's dreams came softly at first, like dew before the dawn. They settled upon his sleep in silence. The stars would shift, the rivers would vanish, the ground would rise like a wave. He saw animals walking in pairs. He saw trees bent under wind that had no source. And in every dream, he heard a voice, not loud, not cruel, but steady, a voice like water, a voice that called his name, Noah. He was not like the others. His hands were rough with labor. His feet bore the calluses of a man who walked humbly. But his heart, the Book of Genesis tells us, was blameless in his generation. In a world consumed by violence, he did not raise his voice in anger. In a time when men worshipped giants and bowed before monuments, he knelt only before the unseen. He listened, and so the dreams came again. This time, clearer. He saw the skies crack open. The heavens poured down their grief. Mountains melted like wax. Cities of the giants crumbled into the sea. And in the center of it all, a great vessel wooden, wide, rising upon the waters. A house without windows. A ship with no sail. Floating, waiting, alive. He awoke in darkness, breath trembling. His wife stirred beside him. He said nothing. There were no words, only awe, only silence. The next day, he walked into the forest. He placed his hand on a tree. The bark was warm. The wind did not speak, but it no longer felt foreign. It wrapped around him like a mantle, and somewhere deep inside, he knew the time had come. He would build what he had seen, but how? There were no blueprints, no schematics, only vision, only trust. But Noah did not hesitate. He gathered his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and he told them the truth. The world was ending. At first, they did not believe him. Who would? The sun still rose. The birds still sang, though quieter than before. The giants still ruled. The cities still shimmered. But they saw the look in his eyes. A stillness. A certainty. And they remembered the dreams they too had begun to see. So they listened. And they worked. They felled trees not with fire, but with reverence. They shaped planks with care. Every strike of the hammer was a prayer. Every nail a cry for mercy. The ark rose slowly, frame by frame, like a rib cage for the world to rest inside. It was massive, longer than memory, wider than fear, taller than pride, and the people laughed. They came from cities, from valleys, from towers carved by the Nephilim. They mocked him. "What is this boat?" they jeered. "There is no sea here. There is no rain." The giants themselves passed by in thunderous steps, casting shadows over the rising ark. "Fool," they muttered, "build your coffin. We are eternal." But Noah did not stop, because the voice had returned, not in sleep this time, but in the air, in the trees, in the rhythm of the earth. A whisper that wrapped around his bones, "2 by 2 they shall come. Be ready." And they came. The animals, from places Noah had never seen, from deserts and jungles, from mountaintops and swamps. They came without fear. Lions walked beside lambs. Serpents coiled in peace. Birds flew in flocks that darkened the sky. In silence, they entered the ark, no force, no cage, no whip. They came because they too had heard the mourning of the earth. And still, it did not rain. Years passed. The ark was finished. Its door stood open. Noah waited. The laughter of men grew crueler. The giants bellowed louder. Cities rose even higher. One last tower stretched into the clouds, as if to pierce the throne of heaven itself. And Noah dreamed again. This time, the dream was different. He stood upon the ark, but it was adrift. The world around him was water. The mountains were gone. The stars were hidden. And in that watery silence, he saw faces, millions of faces floating, fading, weeping. The voice returned, "The days of man shall be 120 years. Then the deep shall open." He awoke with tears. He knew what was coming, and he knew it could not be stopped. So he prepared. He gathered food. He strengthened the beams. He prayed. And all around him, the world continued as it always had, drinking, marrying, dancing, killing. The Nephilim, now bloated with their own power, could not see what Noah saw. They could not hear what he heard. They ruled with fists of stone. They painted the skies with fire. They dragged beasts into the streets and called it sport. They consumed without end. And beneath their feet, the earth wept. Noah walked the length of the ark. He placed his hand on its wooden side. He closed his eyes, and he dreamed one final time. He saw a single drop of rain fall onto his hand, then another, then the sound soft, like fingers on a drum, then louder, then roaring. He saw the deep split open. He saw fountains rise from the belly of the world. He saw waves crash over mountaintops. He saw giants fall, cities dissolve, silence swallow the noise. And in the center of it all, peace, the kind of peace only found on the other side of cleansing. Noah opened his eyes. The sky was still clear, but not for long. It was not born in fire, nor forged in the manner of weapons or thrones. The ark came into being like a memory remembered slowly, reverently, as though the wood itself knew its purpose. It rose not from ambition but from obedience, not from blueprints drawn by men, but from whispers heard in the quiet spaces between prayers. The ark was not a vessel of escape. It was a cradle. The voice had told Noah to build, not just to build, but to build according to the pattern shown to him. No one had ever seen such a craft. It was not made for sailing. It had no oars, no rudder, no mast. It was not a ship to cross a sea, but a womb to carry life through the end of a world. Its measurements were strange to men, cubits that stretched beyond logic. Wood chosen not for beauty, but for endurance. Gopher wood. The text says, a kind of wood now forgotten by name but remembered in purpose. A wood that drank in pitch and did not rot. Each plank was laid with care. The ark grew like a forest turned inside out, a tree remade into shelter. Its beams whispered under the weight of prophecy. Every nail was a covenant, every joint a promise. Noah worked by day, guided not by men, but by the still voice that had first spoken rain into his dreams. And the giants watched. They came not in armies, but in curiosity. Their great eyes peered over ridgelines. Their footsteps sank into the earth. They whispered among themselves, some scoffing, some silent. The ark frightened them not because of its size, but because of its stillness. It did not shout. It did not threaten. And yet, it stood, and grew, and waited. It was unlike anything they had seen. Their own constructions were monuments to ego towers clawing at the heavens. Temples thick with gold and smoke, but the ark was plain, honest. Its beauty was in its silence. It was not built to dominate, but to endure. And it began to hum, not with sound, but with purpose. As it neared completion, the air around it changed. Birds nested in its rafters before being called inside. The winds moved differently near its hull. The trees nearby leaned as though in reverence. Animals began to appear, not in chaos, but in calm, 2 by 2, by sevens, according to their kind, as if some ancient rhythm, long forgotten, had stirred again. Noah did not summon them. They came. The lions walked without hunger, the lambs without fear, insects by the thousands, unseen yet accounted for. Reptiles slid across stones and into shadow. Birds filled the sky with patterns that mirrored sacred geometry. And the people watched. Still they mocked. You build your prison. They said, there is no sea. The skies are clear. But their laughter faltered when the animals came. Their laughter stopped when the thunder rolled on a cloudless day. The ark stood ready. Inside, it was cavernous but ordered. Corridors like ribs. Chambers lined with straw. Troughs carved with hands that shook with awe. Water jars sealed with wax. Storehouses filled with grain. Nesting spaces tucked into corners. It was not chaotic. It was sanctuary. A floating mountain. A wooden Eden. And at the center, a single door. Large, heavy, carved not with symbols, but with silence. Noah looked at it each evening, knowing it would one day close, and that when it did, the world as it had been would cease to be. His sons helped in the final days. Shem, patient and steady. Ham, strong and silent. Japheth, quick and thoughtful. They were not perfect, but they were willing, and in their eyes, Noah saw the reflection of a promise made to Enoch, a promise that a remnant would remain. The people still came. Crowds gathered near the base of the valley. Children pointed. Elders muttered. The giants stood on distant hills, arms folded like mountains, but no one approached. No one asked to enter. The door remained open, but they laughed too loudly to hear the invitation. And then the sky changed. Not at once, not with violence, but with a sigh. The light dimmed. The clouds thickened. Birds flew low. The animals quieted. A wind rose from the east, steady and slow, and the voice came again. It is time. Noah stepped back from the door, and it closed, not by his hand, not by the hands of his sons. The door moved as if by breath drawn inward and sealed. A sound like thunder rolled across the valley. The wood groaned and settled. A line was drawn. Inside, it was dark, but not fearful. Torches flickered against smooth beams. The animals settled. The air was heavy, but not oppressive. There was peace, the kind that comes before the breaking, the kind that comes when the last note of a song lingers before silence. Outside, the world continued. For one day, perhaps two, enough time for doubt to flicker, for mockery to return, for some to laugh and say, "See, nothing happens." But the door did not open, and neither did the sky. Until it did. It began not with storm, but with stillness, a quiet so complete it made hearts tremble. Then, a single drop. Then two. Then rain as it had never rained, thick, heavy, endless. And beneath the earth, the fountains broke. Water rose from the deep, from caverns beneath the mountains, from the roots of the world. And the ark lifted. It did not creak. It did not flail. It rose like a leaf, like a breath. The animals were silent. Noah held his wife's hand. His sons gathered in the central chamber. They listened. To the world ending. Giants ran. Cities crumbled. Temples dissolved into mud. Those who had laughed now screamed. But the door did not open. The rain did not stop. The ark did not turn. It only rose, because it had been whispered into being. And now, it would carry life through the silence. They had once walked like gods, their shadows stretching across valleys, their footsteps like drums upon the land. They raised cities in the time it took men to gather stones. They tore down forests for sport. Their names were carved into the bones of mountains. But now their towers drowned, their voices lost, their thrones crumbled. The last days of the Nephilim had begun. The flood did not come all at once. It rose like a lament. First the ground swelled, drinking in the rain with greedy thirst. Then the rivers overtopped their banks. Roads vanished beneath sheets of water. Trees leaned in surrender. The great cities, those impossible citadels carved by giant hands, began to groan as water kissed their gates. And the giants ran. They ran not because they were weak, but because they understood too late. They, who had once mocked Noah's quiet obedience, now clawed at the soil for elevation. They climbed the highest places, summits where the clouds gathered, cliffs that scraped the heavens. But the rain followed. The fountains of the deep did not stop. The water came not as flood alone, but as judgment. Some tried to fight it. One giant raised his arms and commanded the storm to cease. His voice thundered across the hills, but the wind answered with a silence that broke him. Another tore trees from the ground and lashed them into a raft, only to be capsized by a wave taller than temples. One carved a cave into the side of a cliff, sealing himself inside. But the earth split beneath him and swallowed his shelter whole. Others cried out to the heavens. They called the names of their fathers, the watchers, now bound in silence, sealed in chains beneath the mountains. But the watchers did not answer. They could not. Their voices had been taken, their light extinguished. And so the giants were alone. In the last days, they remembered the stars. The songs sung before men walked upright. They remembered the pact on Mount Hermon. The names, the flames, the love that led to ruin. Some wept, some repented, but it was too late. The earth had spoken, the heavens had answered, and the ark had already risen. Inside, Noah waited. The sound of the rain was constant, a lullaby and a lament. The animals stirred gently. The walls groaned but held. Each creak was a heartbeat, each wave a breath. He did not celebrate. He did not rejoice. He only prayed, because he, too, had loved the world. He had seen the good in it, even as it fell. He had tended vines. He had watched children dance. He had felt the warmth of the sun before the sky turned grey. And now, all of that was gone. Washed, drowned, but not forgotten. Outside, the water reached the hills. The highest places now looked like islands, shrinking with every breath. The giants gathered there, those who had survived the first wave. Their eyes no longer burned with pride. They stared at the sky. In silence, they no longer called themselves gods. They remembered they were dust. One, whose name is lost but whose memory remains in the Book of Giants, raised his hand toward the clouds, not in defiance, but in surrender, and the waters covered him. There were no more songs in the cities, no more sacrifices on the altars, no more laughter among the stones. The Nephilim, who had ruled with terror and beauty, who had walked between heaven and earth, were no more, and the world sighed. The rain did not stop. 40 days it fell unceasing. Unyielding, the fountains of the deep poured from the broken belly of the earth. Mountains vanished. The ark floated on an endless ocean, but beneath that water, stories ended. Not all giants were destroyed by the waves. Some passed into legend. Some say they fled into the caves of the earth, deep into realms untouched by time. Others say their spirits wander, trapped in the ruins of what once was. The old Hebrew texts speak of Rephaim and Anakim, echoes of the Nephilim who appeared again in later days, lesser in stature, but great in memory. Their legacy did not end, but their reign did. Their monuments crumbled, their scrolls dissolved into mud, their songs faded into silence. Their names, once carved in stars, were washed clean, and yet the world remembered. In the deserts of Qumran, fragments of their story were hidden. In the scrolls found sealed in jars in 1947, pieces of the Book of Giants survived. Names, dreams, warnings, traces of the last thoughts of beings who had stood too tall for too long. The Church Fathers suppressed these writings. Athanasius, in his canon list of 367 AD, excluded them. The Apocalypse of Peter, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, all cast aside. But the earth remembered, the scrolls endured, and now, in our time, they speak again. They tell us that might is not salvation, that power without humility leads to ruin, that the flood was not merely water, it was mercy. A world that could not breathe had to be washed, not destroyed, reset, reborn. And so the Nephilim fell, one by one, silently, like stars slipping beneath the waves. And in their place, stillness, the kind of stillness that follows a storm, the kind that waits for sunlight, the kind that knows the first word spoken in a new world will not be shouted but whispered. It began with a breath, The air grew still, not in calm but in expectation. The skies once blue, then grey turned heavy, swollen with silence. The wind paused, as though waiting. The birds vanished, even the insects, whose wings once hummed through every field and orchard, were gone. Only the trees remained, tall and unmoving, listening to something older than storm. Then, the first drop fell. It struck the roof of the ark like a whisper. Then another, then 10, then thousands. A rhythm formed, not wild, not violent, gentle, relentless. The sky did not roar. It mourned. Its grief poured down in cold streams. The heavens had wept before, but never like this. Inside the ark, Noah stood in the center of the great vessel. Around him, the animals stirred but did not panic. The torchlight flickered along the wood, casting soft shadows. The pitch-dark hull groaned like a ship sighing in its sleep. His sons moved quietly, checking the chambers. His wife held water to her lips. Listening, no one spoke. They only waited. The water pooled first in the low places. The gullies filled. The cracks in the stone darkened. The dust turned to mud. Then the rivers rose not in waves, but as walls, steady, wide, swallowing everything in their path. The lakes spilled their banks. The ponds disappeared into one great sea, and then the deep opened. The fountains of the abyss broke free. From beneath the mountains, from beneath the valleys, from caverns never touched by light, the waters came not upward, but outward, as though creation itself had ruptured. The belly of the earth gave up its flood. It was not chaos. It was unmaking. The cities of men, built upon the backs of the Nephilim, dissolved. Their walls collapsed. Their altars sank. Their towers cracked and crumbled, not with fury but with finality. The roads vanished. The idols floated, then sank. The echo of chants once spoken in the name of false gods was carried off by waves that had never heard a lie. The people screamed. Some ran to the hills, believing height could save them. Others pounded on the door of the ark, crying for mercy. But the door, sealed by heaven itself, did not open. It was not anger that kept it shut. It was obedience. The time had passed. Noah wept. He wept not for the mocking voices now silenced, but for the beauty that had been lost. He had seen gardens destroyed, not by flood, but by pride. He had seen children taught to hate. He had watched as joy was traded for power. And now, the waters came to make clean what had been defiled. 40 days the rain fell, not in storms, not in torrents, but with purpose. The flood was not a rage, it was a return. Inside the ark, peace. The animals did not panic. They huddled close. The torches burned slow. The wood swelled with moisture but held. The ark rose not fast, not violently, but as a mountain rising through cloud. Up and up, as the world below was swallowed. The mountain tops disappeared. First the low hills, then the ridges, then the highest peaks. The giant's final refuge, lost beneath the waves. The flood rose 15 cubits above the tallest mountain. The scrolls tell us, the entire world submerged, nothing left but sky and sea and the ark between them. And for the first time since Eden, silence. No voices of men, no cries of beasts, only wind, only water, and within that silence, a pulse, life, still alive, still breathing, still held in the womb of the ark. The judgment had come, but mercy had not left. The ark was not a fortress. It was a seed, floating, waiting, cradling the remnant of what had once been and what would be again. Outside, the flood erased the names of the Nephilim. Their inscriptions on stone vanished, their cities forgotten, their thrones dissolved into silt. The stories they had carved into mountains were now read only by the fish who swam above them. Their glory sank like gold, heavy and hollow. But the earth remembered, and the scrolls those buried in caves before the rains remembered. 2. In 1947, fragments of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants emerged from the Dead Sea's edge, testimonies of the flood, of what came before, of what was lost. They whispered what the waters had washed away, that the flood was not the end. It was the beginning. Noah stood at the small opening above the ark. Rain still fell, but it had changed. Softer, weaker, as though the sky, too, had grown tired. The wind spoke not in rage, but in breath. The waters stretched endlessly, horizon to horizon, and he closed his eyes. He dreamed again. He saw a branch, a bird, dry land, a rainbow across a sky no longer grey. He saw a new beginning, not clean, but possible. He saw the world, not as it had been, but as it could be. And he whispered a prayer, not of triumph, not of thanks, but of hope, because though the waters rose, so too did the promise, a promise that from silence there would come song, from death, life, from flood, faith, and from judgment mercy that does not forget. It took more than cities. The flood, in its rising quiet, swallowed more than towers and temples. It took voices, memories, names, songs once sung at harvest, laughter from children long gone. It took the scent of blooming fields, the rhythm of daily life, the old stories spoken around firelight. It took the pride of kings and the despair of peasants. It washed over it all, not as a thief, but as a hand drawing closed a curtain that had remained open too long. What the water took, it did not do so in rage. It was not a punishment of anger. It was a cleansing of sorrow. For the world had cried out, and the Most High, in mercy, had answered. But not everything lost was wicked. Some things the flood swept away were beautiful. Gardens planted in hope, instruments carved with care, poems etched into stone, the innocent dreams of the last child to die before the rain began. These, too, were carried off because the flood did not distinguish between what was evil and what was near it. It came not to pick and choose, but to restart. And so the water rose, and the old world died. Gone were the names of the giants. Their monuments fell beneath the rising sea. Their thrones dissolved. The Nephilim, once feared and adored, were now silt and memory. The earth had opened her mouth and taken them in. Their scrolls were lost to rot. Their weapons rusted into ruin. Their voices were no longer heard, not even in echo. But what the water took, it also sealed, deep beneath the mud and rock, beneath layers untouched for thousands of years. Fragments remained. Bones, symbols, stories, buried truths waiting for rediscovery. They would not be seen again until the 20th century, when the earth, once again, yielded its hidden memory. In 1945, near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi, jars were unearthed, sealed tight, hidden since the 4th century. Inside, scrolls, writings banned by the church, words buried so they would not burn, the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Gospel of Truth, and more. Words that echoed the same pattern of fallen ones, of secret wisdom, of a world once cleansed and once again in need of redemption. 2 years later, in 1947, the shepherd boy in Qumran threw a stone and heard history crack open. The Dead Sea Scrolls, scrolls older than empires, filled with names long hidden. Enoch, Mahweh, the Book of Giants, buried before the flood of time, preserved not by chance, but by providence. The water had taken. Yes, but not everything. Noah floated above the world in silence. Inside the ark, the days blurred. 40 nights of rain, then stillness, endless stillness. The sound of water lapping against the hull, the rustle of animals sleeping, the creak of beams settling into memory. He looked out through the small window, but there was no horizon, only sky above and reflection below. He knew what had been lost. He had walked among the forests, now drowned. He had spoken with men whose bones now rested in the deep. He had seen children playing in fields now covered in water. And he grieved not for the wickedness that had been judged, but for the good that had been touched by it. Because when the righteous suffer to preserve righteousness, there is always pain. The flood was just, but it was not painless. What the water took, it did so completely. There was no going back, no city to return to, no garden to replant. Everything would begin again, not from the middle, but from the root. And that was the purpose. Noah remembered the voice in the dream, "I will make all things new." Not better, not stronger, but new. Newness requires letting go. Death before rebirth. Emptiness before fullness. And so, the ark floated. Each day, the water held the vessel like a palm cradling a seed. Each day, the silence deepened. It was not despair. It was waiting. Beneath the surface, the world was rearranging. Mountains shifted. Oceans were born. The shape of the land changed forever. The pre-flood world was gone. The cities, the roads, the carvings in stone, all lost. The giants who ruled with fire and fear forgotten by the living, remembered only in myth. The watchers, already bound in the earth's deep places, heard nothing now but silence. But above the waters, life endured. And when the time was right, the wind began to move. It came softly, a breeze across the face of the deep, then a wave, then the clouds parted. Light returned, not harsh, not blinding, but warm. Noah felt it on his skin and knew the waiting was ending. The water receded. Slowly, mountain tops emerged, first their tips, then their slopes. Ravens flew and did not return. Then the dove, then the olive branch. Then the voice, "Come out." Noah stepped onto dry land. He did not rush. He knelt. The first thing he built was not a home, but an altar. The first thing he offered was not a plan, but a prayer. And heaven responded with promise. A rainbow arched across the sky, light refracted through the very water that had judged the world. A sign that the flood was complete, that the door was closed, and the new chapter had begun. But Noah would never forget what the water took. And neither should we, because in remembering what was washed away, we learn what must never return. And in remembering what was preserved, we find the hope that endures. There are silences that destroy and silences that heal. After the 40 days of rain, after the fountains of the deep were sealed again, after the waves had washed over every city, every altar, every name etched in stone, there was no cry, no chant, no song, only silence, a silence that blanketed the world like ash. a silence that breathed through the clouds and settled gently over the new earth. The ark came to rest. It did not crash upon a mountain. It settled softly on the slopes of Ararat, as if placed there by a hand unseen. It groaned against the rock, soaked and tired, like a womb now emptied. Inside, the air was warm, still, fragrant with straw and breath. Noah waited. He sent the dove. It returned with nothing. He sent it again. This time, it came back with green in its beak, a branch, a living thing. Proof that the earth had not only been cleansed, but was growing again. One more time he sent it, and it did not return. Then he knew. The world had opened its eyes. The door was unsealed. Noah stepped out, not with a shout, not with celebration, but with reverence. The earth beneath his feet was wet, but solid. Hills stretched beyond the mist. Trees stood like children learning to walk. The sun, pale with newness, warmed his shoulders, and around him the animals emerged slowly, gratefully, as though waking from a long dream. There were no giants to cast shadows, no cities to choke the horizon. The air was quiet, filled only with wind and birdsong. The silence after the flood was not emptiness. It was peace, and Noah built an altar, not to mourn what was lost, but to give thanks for what remained. He laid stone upon stone. He chose his offering not in fear, but in love. And as the smoke rose into the sky, the Most High spoke not with thunder, not from fire, but with a promise whispered through light. Never again would the waters cover the whole earth. Never again would judgment fall without mercy. And as a sign, the rainbow stretched across the sky, a bow turned upward, away from man, a weapon laid to rest. The silence after was a kind of music. It was the breath of a new world, but it was not without memory. Noah walked the fields and remembered the laughter of children long drowned. He stood beside streams and saw the faces of old neighbors in the water's reflection. He planted seeds where cities once stood. He looked to the stars and named them again. The past did not vanish. It became lesson, warning, and grace. His sons gathered stones and built homes. They tamed the land not with greed, but with gratitude. The animals scattered, finding their places, and the world was quiet but alive. The Nephilim were gone, their voices silenced, their temples shattered, their monuments broken, but their memory lingered in caution, in fear, in stories whispered at night. Noah would tell his sons the truth of the watchers, of the flood, of what power becomes when it forgets humility, and of how silence, though feared, is sometimes the only voice loud enough to change the world. The rainbow shone above them. Its colors wrapped the sky like a crown of light, and beneath it, the family of Noah began again. Not perfect, not pure, but aware of what came before, aware of the mercy that saved them. And in caves far away, beneath dry earth and forgotten sands, scrolls slept the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, the stories too heavy for the world that followed, hidden from empires, buried by scribes, protected by silence, until they were found, thousands of years later, in jars near the Dead Sea, in fragments beneath Nag Hammadi, in whispers that refused to die. They returned just as the rainbow had promised not to condemn, but to remind that the flood had come, that the silence had followed, and that mercy, once given, does not vanish. It echoes. Even now, the water receded, The ground dried. Life returned. But the story did not vanish. Though the flood had washed away the cities and thrones, though it had swallowed the Nephilim and silenced the watchers, the memory of that world, the world before the flood, remained. Not in monuments or scrolls, not in the ruins of towers or the echoes of vanished names, but in whispers, in shadows, in dreams that woke prophets, in stories told to children by fireside. It lived, like an ember in ash, waiting. The story was not lost. Enoch had seen to that. Before the flood, before he was taken, Enoch had written, he had recorded everything, the descent of the watchers, the birth of the giants, the secrets they taught, the judgment that followed, the great cleansing. His words were inked on scrolls, bound in leather, buried deep where water could not reach, passed from hand to trembling hand, hidden when kings banned them, protected by those who still remembered the sound of the voice that once walked with man in the cool of the day. After the flood, the world began again, but the echo of the old world remained. The descendants of Noah would settle the earth. They would build nations, speak new tongues, rise and fall by the same patterns. Power would seduce them, pride would blind them, and the story would fade into legend. But not forever. In secret places, the scrolls endured. The Book of Enoch, forbidden by Athanasius, removed from canon, survived in Ethiopia, preserved by priests who guarded it like a holy fire. The Book of Giants, once whispered among the Essenes, slept in desert caves for 2,000 years. The Gospel of Judas, the Apocalypse of Peter, and the scrolls of Nag Hammadi texts that remembered the first fall, the first rebellion, the first judgment buried by monks who feared what would happen if they burned, hidden so they could be found. And they were. In 1945, in the sands near Nag Hammadi, a farmer uncovered a jar. Inside, leather-bound books, silent for 16 centuries, the words of mystics, visionaries, those who remembered the days before dogma. And in 1947, in a cave above the Dead Sea, a shepherd boy threw a stone and history awoke. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the greatest archaeological discovery of the modern age, revealed fragments of texts that had not been read since the time of Christ. Among them, Enoch, giants, watchers. The story returned, not as myth, not as fantasy, but as history, buried history, suppressed history, a history too heavy for the world. Until now, the Nephilim, once dismissed as legend, re-entered the conversation. The Watchers, once erased from the record, reappeared in the light. The flood, once seen as symbol, reclaimed its voice as memory. But more than names and places, what returned was the warning. That knowledge, when given without wisdom, corrupts. That power, when pursued without humility, devours. That there is a line between heaven and earth, and when crossed, it does not break quietly. And yet, with the warning came the promise that even when the world is flooded, a remnant remains, that even when the scrolls are buried, the truth endures, that even when the voice is silenced, the word still speaks. Noah remembered. Shem taught his children. Abraham would one day hear echoes in the stars. Moses would walk the same mountain where the watchers once fell. Prophets would see fire in their dreams and know what it meant. And Christ, when he came, would speak of the days of Noah not as a tale, but as a sign, as it was in the days of Noah. so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man, because the story does not stay buried. It waits. It waits in the lines of forgotten texts, in the symbols etched in ancient stones, in the dreams that wake us at 3 a.m., in the questions no history book answers, in the ache for something older than time, truer than what we are told. It waits for us to remember, to listen, to see, and when we do, we understand. The flood was not the end. It was the beginning, and what was lost was not lost forever. It was hidden, so it could be found. By you? Now, the waters have long since dried. The ark rests in silence. Its timbers weathered by time but held together by memory. The rainbow still arches, not in the sky, but in the covenant kept within the heart of the earth. The giants are gone. The watchers remain bound. The altars of gold and blood have turned to dust. And yet, the story breathes. It breathes in the hush between stars. It breathes in your bones. The world before the flood was not just a place, it was a warning, a mirror, a pattern repeated through time. Pride rising, power unchecked. The divine mingled with the broken, and then the cleansing, not as vengeance, but as mercy. Not to destroy, but to reset, so that something softer, purer, might grow again. You, too, are part of that story. You carry the remembrance of rain in your spirit. You walk upon ground that once held the sorrow of the Nephilim's fall. You dream, just as Noah dreamed. You wonder, just as Enoch wondered. And in your quietest hours, you may feel the floodwaters rise in your own heart, the longing to wash away what has become too heavy to bear. But know this, the ark still floats, not of wood, but of grace. Not on water, but on the stillness offered in every moment of surrender. It waits for you. It always has. The scrolls were hidden. The words were buried. But now they return. Now, as you fall into sleep, they whisper to you not to frighten, but to remind you that what is true can never be lost, that the light given in the beginning is never drowned, only dimmed, and that even in the darkest flood, you are not alone. So close your eyes now. Let the water recede. Let the storm pass. Let your soul rise like the ark above the waves of this world. You are safe. You are seen. You are remembered. And just like Enoch before you, just like Noah who stepped onto dry land with tears and hope, you are walking into a new world, one shaped not by giants, but by gentleness, one ruled not by fear, but by faith, one that remembers the flood but lives in the promise that followed. Good night, wanderer of forgotten ages. May your dreams be filled with rainbows, and may the story keep you always.